Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I am pleased to welcome you to our program today, The Library's Role in Course Content Provision, Textbooks, and Open Educational Resources, which is sponsored by BibliU. Today's discussion is one in a series of webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic, library, and research communities. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a couple of features of the webinar software. For all of you joining us as attendees today, please know that your cameras should be disabled and you should be automatically muted. So if you're worried about noise or feedback or anything like that, please don't worry about it. We should have that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with our presentation materials today, which will be brief as this is a panel discussion. We're also using the Q&A feature today. If you'd like to ask questions of the presenters, we would direct you to that Q&A feature. The audience for the presentation is large and we expect quite a few questions. So if we don't get to yours, please don't take it personally. It's just a matter of the amount of time that we have. That said, if you have questions, drop them in as they come to you throughout the presentation. Also note that there should be closed captioning available for today's session. And to access that, you can use the little CC button there to toggle it on or off. Also note that we are recording the program today, and everybody who registers should receive a follow-up email with a link to that archive version. And our speakers today are Linda Kobashigawa, Rex Krajewski, and our moderator today is Dave Sherwood. And that's all I'll say about them as I turn things over to Dave here.
Great, thank you, Mark. So yeah, just to kick off, I'll be covering a bit in terms of context. So in terms of BibliU and the library, we're a platform that's been working with libraries for many years, and we're proud to be the first to have brought conventional textbooks into the library system and under a business model that kind of makes sense to libraries and is available to all students through the discovery layer. We work with 140 universities and colleges, all shapes and sizes, including our partners here today, and some others here. You see Occidental College, University of Phoenix, MIT, Cal State, so a really broad range of partners. In terms of our mission, it's to help improve student outcomes by making learning content more accessible, affordable, and engaging. I myself was a student when we set BibliU up, and the goal was to address textbook affordability and accessibility. As most of us know today, you know, there are pretty major problems for all students and institutions around the world, but certainly the US being a primary driver there. In terms of what the platform offers, we have 2 million titles and courseware from over 2,000 publishers. Many of the publishers you probably struggle to get content from in the library space, you know, like the Pearsons, the Wileys, the Sages of the world, many of whom content is either unavailable to libraries or maybe on a very restrictive model that's only available, you know, on a one concurrent user type model. We have fully customized integrations, so we work with all the major library systems, and a leading experience on accessibility. Cool, next slide. Yeah, thanks, Brian. In terms of the BibliU Learning Enablement Platform, there are a couple of key points that I want to run you through. The first, we've touched on already, we have a huge number of publishers, and our publishing relations team is always willing to look for those hard to get texts that you've been unable to get hold of digitally before. I know many of you have had a physical textbook reserve in the library and have just found it impossible to get that content digitally. That's really an area of specialty for us, but we can help with really any content. We have price points which are typically 50% less than a bookstore and 30% less than Amazon, which is a really important point in terms of affordability for the institution and also the student. We have a range of automations to make the purchasing and deployment as automated as possible, and this can save institutions a lot of money. And then in terms of students, we have 2 million plus students with access to the platform and 460,000 plus study hours on the platform. So I'm really proud of the impact we've been able to have on students globally. Next slide. Great. So I'll let Linda introduce herself, and she's been working with us for some time now, a partner at Fresno City College.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Linda Kobashigawa. I am a librarian at Fresno City College. I've been a librarian there for about 6 years. I do a lot of things as we do at community colleges. We wear a lot of hats, but more recently, I have been working with managing our electronic collections, our digital collections. We have been working with Bibliu for quite some time in building our catalog up, and we will be doing a full launch actually this fall. So I don't know full usage yet, but we're expecting that this is going to be immensely popular. Within the past year as well, which I'll talk about later on, I have become the OER liaison for Fresno City College as well. So I'll be talking about OER as well as some of the work we've been doing with getting the print textbooks in the hands of our students during the pandemic.
Thank you, Linda. And great to have you here today. Rex, would you like to go next?
Sure. Rex Krajewski, North Shore Community College on the North Shore of Massachusetts. I've been the director of library and learning commons services for about 5 years. And yeah, since when I arrived 5 years ago, one of the first targets for really focus was course reserves and course content access. And that's evolved over time. And, you know, let's just say our digital reserves efforts were accelerated by the pandemic, but they were already underway. We've been working with Bibliu since last fall, and we've been in a slow but steady pilot with designs to continue to grow and evolve what we can do for our students through the service.
Excellent. Thanks, Rex. Brian, move on to the next slide. Great. So we're going to kick off the panel discussion. Brian, do you want to kick this off then? Brian, do you want to kick off the panel discussion?
Sure, yeah. So the first question we have is pretty broad. I'm Brian Cammy. I'm our senior marketing manager. It's broadly for Rex and Linda. I guess we'll start with Linda. How is your library currently working to get students their course content, OER initiatives, textbook reserves, and how has that shifted over the pandemic?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have a pretty large print textbook on reserve collection. We've had that for quite some time because we were actually allocated funding to purchase some print textbooks for this reserve collection. So with that said, access was somewhat limited, especially when the pandemic hit and students were no longer on campus. So it was, we only had print copies, primarily 1 to 2 copies of each of a single title, and available for in-library use only, which is a pretty standard, 2-hour loan period where students could use and study from the textbook at a time. So of course, when the pandemic hit, students weren't on campus. This was a real challenge. So we pretty quickly implemented a scanning service where students could request a certain number of scan pages from the textbook to be shared with them. And so we started doing that first via email. Now we're switching more to sort of like a controlled digital lending type format, where we have like time limits in place, no downloading, things like that. Some sort of digital rights management involved in that. And that's primarily how we've been sharing those print materials. During that time, we also began working with Bibliu, which opened up access quite a bit. And we were working with a pretty small number of titles, and we've been adding more and more. So we're adding a bulk of them actually for the fall semester. And so we know that usage is going to increase immensely during the fall semester, and we want to see, you know, track that usage and see what textbooks are being used the most, and make sure we react to that type of usage. Also during that time, we've been working with vendors, contacting publishers. We contacted the campus bookstore, trying to get, as Dave mentioned, multi-user access to a lot of these materials. In some cases, we were successful. Other cases we weren't. So we did rely heavily on that scanning service. And also during this time, I found out that many faculty actually saw it as an opportunity to incorporate or transition totally to OER or incorporate more library resources. So I spent some time learning about OER, building LibGuides, helping faculty find resources that could substitute or provide digital access to those different types of materials. And that actually gave me like the opportunity to think really about like the deep-seated issue, which is, you know, this is an immediate access issue that we need to address now. Absolutely. But the larger issue of textbook course material affordability, equitable access, that's not going to go away. Even when we're all back on campus, it'll continue to be a barrier. So I really kind of dove into the world of OER and connecting the library to just a more concerted effort on our campus. There was some OER movement going on, but it was a little siloed. So we didn't quite know who was using OER, what's going on with it, how big of a movement was actually on our campus. And so since then, and this has been like in the past year, I think, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with, you know, building off of work that was done by our sister colleges, by the previous OER liaison, which is starting an award program that helps faculty adopt and create OER. As well as starting off a first-year experience program where faculty are using OER and zero cost materials in their courses. So we've been doing a lot of movement on that, and I think that's sort of my journey. I think my library's journey to helping make course materials more available, but ultimately just more affordable for our students.
Really great stuff. Rex, do you want to jump in with your library's work in a similar sense? I know there's lots of overlap. And
yeah, there absolutely is a lot of overlap. And I think there's probably a similar story for many of the libraries that are participating and attending today. So we, you know, North Shore has a long history of providing textbook and required course materials via the course reserve service. But specifically over the last 5 years, we've really tried to shift the approach to be proactive and as comprehensive as possible. So in the past, we've waited for faculty initiated requests, and we also sort of, the expectation was that faculty would provide copies of especially the textbooks that they were using. We've moved away. We work with the bookstore list to identify proactively what's being used, and we'll work with faculty to acquire copies where that's possible from them, because obviously that allows us to expand our spending power. But at the end of the day, we'll purchase the items that that we know that they're using and we can't get in another method. Our policy now is to purchase digital access multi-user if possible. For many years, I will say that we have found that the single user access in many cases actually works because of the way we have it set up in our system, so that we don't have people downloading or checking out the books as an option. So it allows multi-access, and when we have to, we'll purchase multiple single-use licenses if that's necessary. For many years, with the leadership of our Center for Teaching, Learning, and Innovation, librarians have worked with faculty to educate about and identify OER course materials. I think that the faculty at the college have been very proactive and progressive about that. And I think that as from the library side of things, we're really trying to emphasize some of the other affordable options beyond OER. the pandemic rendered our extensive physical course reserves collection completely unavailable overnight. So we really redoubled our efforts to acquire course materials electronically. We launched our fully digital reserve service, and that's really the umbrella that we're presenting these access options under. Where possible, again, we licensed. We did find that there were more licensing opportunities that publishers and kind of loosened a little bit with not so much textbook content, but monographic content. We digitize films that were not available electronically, and we have them in a sort of controlled digital lending light kind of service where we're distributing those films to the classes that are using them. We have our pilot with Bibliu, which is a course reserve service, and we're now implementing controlled digital lending. We've done a soft launch this summer, and again, it's the ability to scan content and distribute it for a limited usage by our users. I think it's great for opening up access. It mimics physical course reserves almost identical because there is a time-bound access to the material that you don't get with items that are native digital and you license for more full access. So it definitely expands access, and that's a positive thing, but it also has limitations in that students are really time-bound with those resources. So we kind of see CDL as an option of last resort, but we're glad to be able to have more comprehensive access to course materials using the service.
Also, there's a question in the chat surrounding budget. I don't want to get too specific into the numbers of budgets or anything on this webinar, but I guess if it's a question from Elizabeth, flipping it a bit, how much of this were you able to use COVID-related funding to run, and how will that look moving forward? And then, or are you going other places on campus to get funding? And what does that even look like? Because obviously, library budgets are not growing exponentially at this time, and it's hard to take on new initiatives.
I can start if you'd like, Linda. So with interestingly enough, I know a lot of libraries were able to use COVID related funding for some of these efforts. We have not yet. We used Perkins money to fund our Bibliu pilot, and so that would be using it for courses related to career preparation. That's had its limitations. So we're excited that we're going to be able to put some unrestricted money towards our upcoming Bibliu efforts, which will allow us to be a little bit more strategic about which courses and textbooks we're able to provide based on need and usage and things like that. We long since kind of broke the taboo about buying textbooks. We also did not get funding for that. So we are using operating money to purchase textbooks. I think I'll just say that textbook, our highest circulating items by far are course reserves. And so, for us, the idea of spending money on what's the highest impact and the most used content is a no-brainer. So that goes for spending, money on physical course reserves in the past and potentially in the future, but also spending our money on digital solutions, which expand the access. So we haven't had a lot of non-operating funding put towards this, but our commitment to the impact and the importance is high enough that we have put our operating money there. And I'll just say one other thing. I see a lot of these as proof of concepts. Sometimes you can really show a success with an initiative that folks might not initially see as something they want to invest in. And then maybe some of that, you can make a case for some of that other money coming. And that's what I'm banking on anyway.
Yeah, similarly to North Shore's situation, except we were able to get some CARES funding, some COVID relief funding to invest in making electronic versions of those textbooks available. So we were able to use some of that funding for our print, for a print collection, I believe we are using operating costs. So yeah, similar to North Shore, we've broken that taboo as well. We've been purchasing textbooks. They are and they are our most circulated print collection. So that was something we felt like was important, that we needed to provide access to that right away, because as Rex said, that collection was rendered totally almost totally useless the way we were managing it prior to the pandemic.
Awesome, thanks. So next question that we had, and this ties into Lisa's question in the chat, so I'll also ask that in this as well. But what is the strategy for how course content will play a role in your library moving forward, and how do you view the role of the library in provisioning course content alongside the bookstore? And Lisa's question is mentioning that their college has been resistant to adopting OER because they view the bookstore as a revenue stream, and what suggestions you have with dealing with that and those kinds of concerns that the library is bound to face while trying to do these types of initiatives. Rex, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. Well, access and affordability and equity are college priorities, and we see textbooks and required course materials access as an equity issue. I think philosophically, our administration agrees with us about that. Again, sometimes making the case for the dollars and resources going to that is a little different story, but I think we're really moving in that direction. So the other thing is access is not just about an access point, but it's about actually people getting to have it. And as a commuter college with a large population of working adults with families and et cetera, being able to be on campus to get a book isn't just about serving our remote students or COVID students. It's about serving all of our learners. Even folks who might be able to get to campus for class can't necessarily stick around for a textbook. So that's why the investment in digital reserves predated the pandemic. So we'll be restoring our physical footprint this fall, but we are not going to restart our physical course reserves, at least just yet. This fall, we're committed to continue to invest in digital reserves with the idea, again, that it's a higher impact, more access for more students, and in many cases without the time-bound restrictions. So I will say this, and maybe this will get me in trouble, but like with regards to our relationship with the bookstore, as long as the traditional bookstore model is in play, we're going to continue to invest our resource in providing, no direct cost to student access options via the library and OER. I think we also need to be a voice for change. The current bookstore model is not viable or sustainable, especially for our students. I like to compare it to, the music industry of the early 2000s, where, with the traditional bookstore model, just like the record companies then, they're trying to hold on to their old way of doing things, which is requiring them to continue to raise the prices. And what happens is if you don't come up with an iTunes solution, your consumer is going to come up with a Napster solution. So, I think that as libraries, in the middle of that, I think it behooves us to start to identify some of those iTunes type solutions, which allow our publishers and our content creators to continue to be viable. We need them to in order to continue creating content, but also make a business model that is sustainable for everybody involved. I don't, again, that's a hearts and minds kind of argument. I do know that there are issues with existing bookstore contracts that people have faced when they've looked to engage like Bibliu. I think there is, again, a lot of looking at what's happened during the pandemic in terms of allowances to some of the bookstore companies from the colleges. I will say this again, I'm getting myself in trouble, but our bookstore last fall put a $25 upcharge on all the physical textbooks just across the board. And in my humble opinion, it should have been the other way around, if anything else. With the idea that they were losing revenue, they decided that the way to make up for that was to add this upcharge to the textbooks that they were selling. So, for me, it's a moral issue, and I think, again, the strategy for selling it to the people, the decision makers, is really just hopefully identifying viable solutions that are sustainable for all parties involved, and trying these proof of concept pilots and showing the successes.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Rex. It really is an equity issue, affordability, which includes course content. And for the library, it's really about us just making a commitment to, helping our campus achieve equity goals, and a focus, I think, on being more student-centered. To be completely honest, I haven't much factored in the bookstore into what we've been doing, our initiatives, because student success is our goal. We want to support our students, and if giving them access to affordable materials is part of that, a large part of that, then we are going to work with our faculty to be able to do that. So, I just think OER is a faculty-driven. It should be a faculty-driven initiative as well. And so if you have those champions on your campus, then work together, open those lines of communication, and and have that data that shows how much students are saving, how successful they are in the classes, who these affordability initiatives actually impact, most likely students from historically marginalized communities. And that's what equity is about, right? Closing those gaps. And so yeah, I don't know I don't know that I've thought much about our bookstore, although when we purchase our textbooks, we do buy them from the bookstore, and so maybe that's why I haven't heard there hasn't been so much tenuousness in that relationship. But we are able to work with our bookstore. They provide us with different types of data, and I don't know how this works at other campuses. I don't know how it works at North Shore Rex maybe, but during faculty adoption, they can select whether they're using OER in their courses, and so the bookstore shares that data with us. We also are able to get information about all the textbooks that are in inventory and how much they cost. So we can do things like estimate how much students would save if a course went to 0 degree, or if a degree program went to 0 cost. Things like that to help us move forward with some of these OER and textbook affordability materials. And I don't know, I haven't heard too much pushback from our admin. They seem to be really OER seems to be a pretty positive thing for us. So I don't know if I'm being helpful at all, but I think that I hope that we can work together alongside each other to really address these materials to be more affordable for our students and more accessible.
And I think the point that's emerging from what you're talking about is student success obviously increases retention, which increases overall revenue. So at some point there are some conflicting interests there, because if you're making it very expensive for students to access content, they're not succeeding and they're not being retained, that's hurting the revenue. So it's a bit circular. Dave, I know you have lots of thoughts here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Rex and Linda a question on the kind of the future of the bookstore, because we kind of talked quite a bit about some of the challenges, and like you just referenced, Brian, like the contradicting aims and goals as such. But what do you think the future of the bookstore looks like? And do you think that the library can fill some of the functions that maybe the bookstore has?
I'll go first, Linda, if you'd like. I see that seems to be the desire. Yeah. Again, I don't think that the current bookstore model is a sustainable one. I just don't. And that's, I don't know if the bookstore can remake itself the way like the record industry did, in that analogy, or if there is a totally different solution, or if it's something in between. I think that in the meantime, the library really is, I think the most important thing that we do right now is providing access to course materials and textbooks, and we're doing so in a way that is cobbled together strategies, because of the fact that we're working within a system that is kind of, it's the bookstore model, right? And I just think, providing access is the best way we can start to close the opportunity gap, which we know is maybe the biggest issue with students in higher ed. And our work with course reserves and learning materials, it taps all of our college's strategic and moral priorities, and I just, I was, when I was thinking about this panel, I was thinking about like my favorite adaptation of Raghunathan's 5 Laws of Library Science, is, those of you who are familiar with this, is in 2019, Bashir Hamad Shadrach came up with this version. And, what number one, knowledge is for use in all forms. Every citizen has the right to access all forms of knowledge. Every knowledge is for access by all without discrimination of any kind. Save the time for all knowledge seekers. And a knowledge system is one that evolves with time to achieve all the above laws. So, again, I think that the library very much is already playing a role in that provision. I would like to see it be a less of a separate. I'd like to see something more organic and student-centered and student success-centered. And I don't know if the bookstore model is one that can evolve to be that, or if it's going to be something that's going to start to develop more coming from a learning place as opposed to a profit structure place. And in the meantime, we'll keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think as you say, it depends a lot on the bookstore, but you obviously have the third-party bookstores that are for profit, which can be a conflicting point of interest. And as you say, the library obviously is really kind of working on the opposite basis to try and ensure fair access or ideally free access for all students. But then also you have the campus, the independent bookstores, and whilst technically they're not for profit, they are quite large revenue generators for the institution. And so you get this kind of competing priorities playing off. So yeah, Linda, did you have anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, just really quick. Yeah, I mean, our goals, part of our goals are to support the curriculum, right? And so, being able to give students that access to materials that have a direct effect on their success is, it should be, I think, a priority. And I don't know if we put ourselves in a box or not, but at Fresno City, we've been working on our service unit outcomes, our administrative outcomes for the library. And we did make a point to, put these types of things into our strategic planning. So having like a commitment to advocating for and maintaining materials or collections that alleviate that cost burdens, specifically on students who have been, from marginalized communities. I think during the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of this. Fresno City, we've been loaning out technology, laptops, graphing calculators for some time now, but we really increased our inventory on all of those things during the pandemic. And so I think we are taking on a larger role of making sure that students have access to these materials, and that's really our priority, I think. But at the same time, we have to make sure that that's all supported and recognized, and that it's, we need that support from administration, from the college, to continue to do this, to sustain these services. So yeah, it's a tricky one, how we we move forward along with the bookstore and its current revenue focused model. That's what and that I think that's the issue. We've been working, libraries have been kind of working with publishers for the longest time, especially as we move into copyright in the digital era and no longer owning things but licensing them, and so we'll continue to have to adapt and do what's best for students and how they benefit from these materials.
Great. And I think a lot of questions in the chat about the faculty and working with faculty. And this is one I think, Linda, you'd have really great insights on. But from Carl, we are working on creating a repository and working with faculty to create OER materials. Do you have any of you have experience with that? And I know that you have a good amount of experience working to create OER materials and working with faculty. So do you have anything you would want to share there?
Yeah, actually, we don't. So a repository is absolutely it's on my to-do list. We don't have one quite yet. And so one of my goals with our OER work group is, which is made up of, it's myself as the OER liaison. We also have our regional lead, who was the previous liaison for Fresno City, who's done quite a bit of work. So she really laid the ground foundation for me. But one of my personal goals with this is to understand who has created OER, who's using OER in their courses, because we don't have a full sense of that actually now. And also zero cost materials too. I found a lot of faculty were using library resources as their primary materials in their courses, and we just didn't know about it. So compiling some sort of repository that has all of that information, and it's really just me going out and getting those lists from the bookstore, working with some of the faculty on our OER work group who can share, who's using it in their department, and collecting it that way. So that's something that we're definitely working on. We're not sure. We worked with LibreText, which is a popular OER creation device, I guess, is that we've worked on, but we've looked at other things like Top Hat and other places that we would hopefully be able to host some of those materials.
And then just to list the other couple quick questions that I see about faculty and OER. From Donna, how often do faculty seek you out to assist with finding OER and affordable resources? And then there was another question about, I think it really courseware related. Yeah, on the supplemental. So faculty relying on courseware, and how do you manage that in supporting resources? So those are the two main questions. That's from Rick.
Okay, so how often do faculty seek me out? Oh my gosh, I want to say often. I don't really have like anything to compare it to. What we've been trying to do, especially with our award program, though, is while learning who's using OER in their courses and trying to connect those people with other people in their division in those pathways that are also interested in it, because they're the content experts, and they're going to be the ones who really know which OER are helpful. But as far as the library goes, we do assist them with going to different repositories or referatories, looking for different or specific materials that match their courses, their course outcomes, things like that. And I'm sorry, what was the last question?
It was around courseware, and when faculty want to use courseware or kind of these more interactive textbooks, so that the many faculty in my institution are increasingly rely on not just on commercial textbooks, but the supplemental course materials and platforms that often come with them. And so how do you manage that? Do you just try to discourage faculty from using those platforms or encourage other alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's one of the hard things, because and we are working with several faculty. I mean, Vista's the Spanish textbook is a really huge, we're huge users of that, but we do have Spanish faculty who are looking at creating an alternative to that program, and we do assist with finding OER resources, looking at different software that would work in a similar fashion. Same thing with the math courses and my math lab and things like that. I think at this point we're lucky enough that there are options out there. There might be a learning curve as to how to use it, how to change the test banks, how to incorporate, or I'm sorry, how to make it more specific to your courses, and to the students at our institution. But yeah, I personally am not really, I don't think instructors seek us out to ask about access to those, main publishers, those big textbook publisher coursewares. It's kind of just a decision that they make for their courses. But if they do approach us with questions about, how do I change some of these things? How do I get some free or more affordable ancillary materials? Then we absolutely kind of pull together resource lists and things like that to help them incorporate those.
Yeah, I would say the biggest reason faculty give for not considering OER is giving up that ancillary material. And related to that, I think another problem with affordability is, at least where I am, is that a lot of faculty have been, they buy into the notion that the all-inclusive access directly from the bookstore, the publisher via the bookstore, is the most affordable option for their students. And that's just not true. I'll just say it. That's just not true. And so it's like an education campaign with regards to that. I think the other thing about the ancillary material is, I know some of the major, sort of OER efforts are starting to seek out that kind of a textbook creation, so I think that's on the radar with OER. But I also think it comes back to the notion of OER is not gonna be the answer for it's not the only answer for affordability. It's one of the very good answers, but in the near future, it's not going to be the only answer. And I'll also add that one of the things we've done, because that idea of no cost materials through the library is a big one, because I always tell this anecdote is, the poster child for OER at our college doesn't actually use OER, as far as I know. He uses library resources. So, that's not necessarily a big deal. At the end of the day, the student is getting access to content at no cost. However, when it comes time for getting money and getting resources and justifying that, we continue to get, the money we need to do what we do, that's an important thing for us to know about. And so that's kind of tied into some efforts that we've done, which we didn't do these in order to get this data, but they've allowed us to get more data about that usage. So we're using a product from EBSCO called Curriculum Builder, which is a reading list tool. And what that does is it allows faculty to kind of easily, through the course management system, identify library materials like book chapters and articles and things like that they can create a nice list, and it kind of can be rolled over from semester to semester and so on. That gives us the ability to if we're not hearing about it in other ways, have a number about what this is what faculty are using, and this is how much they're using library materials. Related to that, there's a newer product that we're using called Faculty Select, and it kind of mimics what the Bookstore does, in that it allows a platform for faculty to go and look for OER And then if they don't find OER, instead of pushing them to adopt a textbook for cost, which is what the bookstore version of this does, it shows them what could be available to license through the library. So it's limited. It's really going to favor kind of scholarly monographs over actual textbooks because it's EBSCO stuff that's DRM free, but at the same time, it is a way that we're supporting faculty in identifying no cost options. And again, OER is part of it, but we're trying to attach some of the other solutions and make it more viable and usable by faculty to discover it, because that's a big barrier too. And I think that's why they hang on to the courseware. It's, there's a lot of good reasons why faculty rely on that stuff. And until we can come up with, viable solutions that are quite frankly easy for them, it's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah, and just to add on to something that Rex mentioned is the educational component and the awareness component of it too, because asking or encouraging somebody to switch their course material that's a big thing to do. That's a lot of work that goes into it, and so I think kind of what part of what we've done in some of our campaigns or marketing of OER and building that awareness is, saying like, well, find something like, switch a little bit at a time, like take some chunks that, that you might want to use and that you can find OER for and incorporate that into it, this semester, and then move forward using that. And then, also learning about, how to incorporate some of those materials, because the licensing part of it can be really intimidating, and knowing what you can use and what you can't. So that's also something the library provides some suggestions and advice for.
Amazing. The OER
Can I
point
just
there,
add one
lots of
other
great
quick
questions.
thing, Brian?
Of
I'm
course.
sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
no, I just wanted to say is that one of the things that really exploded during the pandemic was the use of streaming media. And I know that's a little bit outside of the scope here, but the ability for us to be able to digitize content that we weren't able to license proved to be a real lifesaver for faculty. And so again, I think, textbooks is a huge component of, course affordability. But I think looking at all of the learning materials, we also like scientific and graphing calculators, access to those through the library is, even before the pandemic, that's been huge, So looking at the whole cost of, taking a course and where we can play a role in that and supporting it is a really important way to look at this larger issue.
Great. We have tons of questions in the chat. I want to make sure to get to. There are a couple quick answers, I think, for you, Rex, just quick hitters. So what platform are you using for CDL?
So for the rights management, we're using Digify. And I want to do a shout out to Fitchburg State University in Massachusetts, because our pilot is structured almost identically on copying what they've been doing since the fall. We're making some tweaks along the way, but they're really the brainchild to our solution. So we're using a Google Drive is where we hold the content, and we're using Digify to do the rights management.
And then another quick one was a clarification from Bruce. When you mentioned the $25 upcharge, was that per book or per
It was per
class?
book. And to be honest with you, I'm going to double check on that number to make sure I'm right. But I'm married to a faculty member. That's how I was tipped off to this practice. And then I did a little digging, and it was an across the board thing that was done very quietly. It was per book, yes.
Awesome. I also want to quickly mention there are a lot of questions. There are several questions about BibliUse specifically. I don't want to use too much time here, because while we are a vendor and all that, I don't want this to become a sales pitch for BibliU. So if you do have questions about BibliU specifically, you can either reach out to me directly. My email is my name, brian.cami@bibliu.com, or go through our website. Either one works, but we have precious time here, and I don't want to spend too much time pitching BibliU. Then continue with the OER questions. There are 3 questions I just wanted to flag for both of you. So from Helen, is there anything that can be achieved realistically without dedicated funding or staffing for an OER initiative in higher ed? So that's one. And then from Helen again, any of you using specific methods to catalog or flag OER in your library catalogs, institutional repositories? And then from Evelyn, how can the library incorporate OERs into the library collection?
I'm trying to think about what you mean by realistically. That's, yeah, I mean, that's a hard, with our OER program, we needed, with our award program specifically, we needed that funding. And in California, with the California community colleges, we do have a lot of support from the state and from our chancellor's office for creating OER and zero cost materials and degree pathways. So, that's such a hard question. If you don't have that, that level of support, I'm so grateful that we did, because we were able to get her funding for that award program, and within that award program get a dedicated coordinator for the program who's on release time to coordinate it. So I mean, yeah, I think you really do need it. I don't know if Rex has anything to add. I don't mean to pull you into it.
That's all right. I signed up for this. Yeah, Massachusetts also has, its own like kind of statewide efforts around kind of bringing OER together and resourcing it. And, there's a lot of people who can speak to that with a lot more, knowledge than me, but it is essential. And it kind of, to your question about like cataloging or adding to the collection, that's something we're also grappling with. We're part of a network with other public higher ed colleges and universities, and that came up recently is like, do we want to catalog OER? And I think the short-term answer that kind of came from the staff was not at this point, because the access it would be duplicating kind of the access in the repositories that exist or that we're investing in. But I don't think that's a long, I don't know if that's the final answer. That's kind of where we are right now. And I think, it's a very good question. How do we do this? How do we do it? How does discovery kind of play into this? Like, is it better than sort of cataloging these as owned items? Are we better to kind of weave them into our ecosystem via discovery? But I don't have the answers on that, but they're good questions. And I'm asking them too.
I realized I did not answer that question. We do have, we in the past year, I think January 2020 was when we launched Ex Libris. Most California community colleges switched to Ex Libris Alma Primo LMS. So, and we do catalog, and we do have OER and open access materials in our discovery index. So those are available, and I am making an effort. I'm being very choosy at this point, but incorporating open access repositories into our resource list, our database A to Z list for discoverability. We found that students really like those interfaces, especially when they're doing research that requires primary sources and things like that. So we are incorporating those into slowly into our collections and resource lists.
It's something we've been working on at BibleU as well, which is hosting OER on our platform alongside the traditional textbooks and ingesting them into the platform to make that discovery aspect a bit more seamless and cataloging a bit more seamless. And also to help our library partners when they want to expand their OER offering, because we have the advantage of lots of data, and we can say, here's a similar OER content, and work with our partners to help them grow that. So we have 5 minutes left, and I guess we've been focusing on a very specific aspect of what your job is as librarians, but I thought it would be good to end with another more broader point, which is how does this aspect of the library services fit into all of the other things you do to support students? Because your jobs are not simply this, it's so much more. So I was wondering how that fits in, and how you manage to do all of this with all the other stuff that you're working on. Linda, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot. I think we have 20,000 students at Fresno City College. It's a big urban college, and there are now 5 full-time librarians. So we are not a huge staff, and I think that I think both Rex and I mentioned it is we just have to keep advocating for that support, because it does, I wish I could dedicate all of my time. I have been for the past year and will continue to be for the next few years, 50% on reassigned time, which is where I actually am allowed to work on, or I am able to commit time to these OER efforts and other things that I'm working with our Title V grant. So I am fortunate to have that kind of release time to be able to focus on these things. Again, not everybody does. So, I just think if we're continued if we're to continue and increase, our role in working on these initiatives, in, figuring out how to supply access and find affordable solutions, if that's something that the library will continue to do, we need to have that support as far as funding, as far as staffing, as far as release time, the ability to acquire that technology that is necessary to make these things available is absolutely required for us to do it.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, as I said, I think this is, information literacy underpins everything we do. And, supporting student success in all of its measures is obviously, how we kind of define our planning and our vision. But, I think this is maybe the most important and relevant thing we're doing specifically right now. And to kind of echo what Linda's saying is like putting the resources to match that priority, the level of that priority. Spending a good amount of our materials dollars on course materials. Yeah, we're doing that. We're a small staff as well, but it's an all hands on deck effort, and there is an appropriate, and that's actually kind of a morale thing too, because there's parts of everybody's job in the library that touches this effort, and so everybody has ownership and a stake in the successes we have. And we're so close to the students, we all are, everyone on this call, we feel it, we live it with them, and being able to experience the impact of these efforts and literally hear and see what it means for students to have this and recognize that it genuinely impacts their persistence and their success. It's also connected. Again, everything's connected. It's not, okay, now I'm doing OER support. Now I'm doing, textbook affordability. Now I'm doing instruction. It's all part of a consistent whole. Our vision is really about supporting success and, and intellectual growth. And quite frankly, as access or lack of access is a big barrier for people achieving those higher level thresholds of information literacy. So it's kind of foundational, and we try to match our resourcing to its weight of importance.
Amazing. I think we're almost at time, so I will kick it back to Mark. Thank you, Rex and Linda, for participating. Thank you for everyone for joining. Again, if you have any specific questions about BibliU, feel free to email me directly or go through our website. It's brian.cammy@bibliu.com.
Excellent. And I would just echo Brian there and say thank you so much, Rex and Linda. And thank you, Brian, and to Dave as well for joining us. We appreciate your taking the time to do so. And as I've said to each of you a couple of times, I know this is a big topic and an important one to a lot of the folks out there. As I think you can see from just the number of questions and folks' engagement in today's discussion. I would just take a second here before we sign off to remind those of you joining us out there that there is a brief survey which we would invite you to fill out just to give us some feedback on the session today and on the technology and all that sort of stuff. So if you have a couple of minutes, we'd really appreciate it. And I would just say to those of you out there joining us as well, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate your doing so. And we hope, of course, to see you in the near future on another one of our webinars. So thank you, everyone, and we hope the rest of your day is great.